Shalom everyone, it's a pleasure being here in Beit Avichai and to learn Torah with you. Today I would like to focus and to try to explore the difference between history and memory, or in Hebrew, Historia and Zikaron, and something that we shall remember. So when we think about history, I would like to share with you an interesting article that was published in Ktav Ha'et in the magazine. It's called Machshavot by Tzvi Yanai in 1973. And there he says the following: במהותה של ההיסטוריה, the essence of history, says Reynold Neighbor, מצוי paradox, there is a paradox. האדם הוא גם יוצרה וגם מוצרה של ההיסטוריה. The people, humans, are the one who create history, but also they are the product of the history they created. טיעון זה, this claim, הוא רק אחד מיני רבים, it's only one claim from many others, המעמידים את מערכת היחסים בין האדם להיסטוריה על בסיס מורכב ורב משמעי. This is one of the claims that basically create some kind of tension and some kind of a complicated relationship between men and history. Because on one hand, we are the one to create it, on the other hand, we are one of its products. כי יצור בעל תודעה היסטורית, as a person, as a creature who has historical awareness, מבקש האדם להבין באמצעות ההיסטוריה, every person try to understand, to gain insight, using history, עד כמה שהדבר יישמע מוזר, and it seems to be even a little bit weird, because you try to understand from history that you created what? את קיומו ותכלית חייו. Many people look at history in order to understand their own goal, purpose in life. What is the meaning of life? And they look backwards. But whatever was there backwards was created by humans like them. Historia, history, says the famous historian Edward Carr, היא מאבקו הרצוף של האדם, it is this constant struggle of humanity, להבין באמצעות שכלו, to try to gain insight with his cognitive abilities, את סביבתו, his surroundings, ולפעול עליה, and to try to influence it. קריאה בספרי ההיסטוריה היא בבחינת הצצה באלבום משפחתי. When we read history, it's like looking at a family album. Or should I say, family album is probably good for the 1973. You're talking about probably an iPad or something that just revolve the pictures electronically. שאף בתצלומיה היותר קדומים מגלה האדם משהו מזהותו. When you look at this family album and you see a picture of your great-great-great-father, you see some similarities between him and you, between him and your children. Part of your identity belongs to the past. ויש במציאות קווי דמיון אלה כדי להקנות לו תחושת מה של אחיזה בנצח. And when you see those lines of similarities between you and your ancestors, it gives you a little bit of a piece of eternity. לפי שרציפותם והמשכיותם של דברי הימים, because when history continues to evolve, מעידים בו כי איננו פרט ביולוגי סתמי. It basically gives us some kind of comfort that we are not just a biological cell that is here and it fades away and it's gone. But rather there is a link to the generation before us and the generation before us. אלא חוליה בשרשרת. We are basically a link in a chain. שאף כי רבבות מצויות כמותה, even though there are many links in that chain, איתנותה של השרשרת תלויה בכל אחת מן החוליות הבודדות. We know that if there is a missing link in that chain, this chain will fall apart. So now even if I am the smallest link in that chain, I know that without me, there is no history. אולם, אף כי חוליותיה הגלויות, even though the chains are covered, איש טרם פענח את הקוד הגנטי באמצעותו מתממשת ההיסטוריה. But no one was able yet to explore what is the genetic code that basically help history to fulfill itself. כיוון שכך, and as a result of this statement, אין לנו אלא להסכים לדבריו של תומאס פרייס, so we should agree to the comments or to the statement of Thomas Price, להיסטוריה יש משמעות, history has meaning, אבל איש אינו יכול להבינה. But no one can really understand its meaning. I think this is a very powerful and meaningful piece that Tzvi Yanai in his magazine shared with us. History is not a simple issue to discuss. On one hand, we are the ones who created history. All the famous historians basically documented things that they felt that it was important to be documented. That perhaps there are other events that just no one was a witness to them, or no one thought that this is important enough to report on. At the same time, history, we are somewhat of a product of our own history, of our past. How do we create that balance between creating it and being its product? How can we look at history, learn history, derive its meaning from it, and live our lives accordingly? So let's put history aside. I'm not saying to put it in our history, but let's put it aside for just a second, and let's see something that seems to be a bit surprising. When you look at the Jewish texts, you see something else than history. For example, Shmot Yudzayin, Exodus chapter 17, verse 14, after the war against Amalek, the first war against the Jewish people's enemy, it says, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, and Hashem says to Moshe, inscribe this in a document as a reminder and read it aloud to Yehoshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. Zecher Amalek, that's the memory of Amalek, but also it says, Ktov zot zikaron b'sefer, document it as a zikaron, as a memory. Not history, memory. Another source, in Dvarim, in Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verse 3, לא תאכל עליו חמץ 7 ימים, תאכל עליו מצות לחם עוני, you shall not eat anything leavened with it, for 7 days thereafter you shall eat unleavened bread, bread of distress, for you departed from the land of Egypt, so that you may remember the day of your departure from the land of Egypt. If you look at the Hebrew second line, again, למען תזכור, so you shall remember. So we create in Jewish text not history, but memory. What is the difference? Let's see one more source, which might maybe create some kind of association to history. The Torah says, and it seems to be like almost a commandment, in Deuteronomy chapter 32, verse 7, Zechor yemot olam, you shall remember the days of old. Binu shno dor vador. Consider, or binu from the word leitbonen, look, pay attention to the years of every past generation. Ask your parent who will inform you, your elders who will tell you. There is a commandment to seek knowledge that came from the past, to look into it, to investigate it, to explore it. So if I'll pause here for a second, it seems to be that the Torah goes out of its way, not to say history, but rather to say memory. לזכור, למען תזכור. Remember, that you shall remember. Write it so you shall remember. Investigate it. Ask generations from the past. So you will have the knowledge, but they don't call it history. So now you can say maybe history is just a word that was developed much later. And by the way, you will be correct. For example, Professor Avraham Sultman, who was the head of the general history department in the Bar Ilan University, says that the term history הופיע לראשונה, so we know about the word history only by Herodotus, who is basically considered as the father of history, ופירושה של מילה זו ביוונית, חקירה. So history, according to the first time that it was coined, it means investigation, exploration. So it's not only just to read dates, times, names of people, names of places, but it's to delve into your past. In order to do what? And this is where I think we stand in a junction between general history and Jewish memory. And I will try to explain it and obviously illustrating it through the text. Basically, when people learn history, and even if they learn it on the highest levels, you learn history in order to understand the past, in order to understand what they did in years before you and generations before you, to try to understand the environment, the circumstances, the conditions, and then to hopefully derive insights to different things that you do not want to repeat in the present times, because it led to destruction, to catastrophes, to calamities. So you learn from history what not to do in the present time or in the future. However, as we all know, there is a very famous phrase that says, ההיסטוריה חוזרת על עצמה, which means history repeats itself, and many times the joke is it repeats itself because we didn't learn a thing from it, which is very true. But in a way, that's where history ends its mission. It gives you, as much as you want to take from it, insights to your life, to the life of the society, and based on it, you can, in a way, shape a better present and hopefully a better future. Even though sometimes things that applied in years before you do not apply anymore in current times. Some of them are not relevant anymore. So basically, history is there to try to help you to have better mechanism of decisions that will help you and others in current times and in the future. That's not bad at all. That's very meaningful. It's very insightful. So what is the difference between history and zikaron and memory, or the commandment to remember? If you look, Rabbi Soloveitchik created a tremendous principle in terms of trying to understand the idea and the meaning of memory. Rabbi Soloveitchik says the following: Hashem endowed man with time awareness, the ability to sense and feel time, and the existential stream of selfhood. The time awareness has three basic component parts. First, retrospection. Without memory, there is no time. If you don't know that there is past, there is no time, because time is able to basically intertwine all three different dimensions, past, present, and future. Second, the time experience includes exploration of things yet unborn and events not yet in existence. Third is appreciation of the present moment as one's most precious possession. He continues, no one is worthy of time awareness if retrospection is foreign to him or her. If he is incapable of reliving, recovering, and reproducing past experiences, past events which are not re-experienced belong not to history, but to archaeology. Archaeology involves past events that occurred once upon a time, disappeared, and while they may be reproduced by memory, are no alive anymore. Memory is not just a storehouse for latent impressions. There is also the living memory, which reproduces and re-experiences the past. I don't know if I want to add anything, because I think it will detract from this powerful statement, but I will just try to repeat and maybe clarify. Memory is not only just to remember what happened in the past. Memory is not only to derive conclusions or insights from the past, so I will have a better present and future. But rather, it's to rejuvenate it. It, in a way, to resurrect it from the dead. It's to bring it to life. It's to re-engage with it. It's to re-experience it. Is that you take a historical event and you make it a live being, a living being. You rejuvenate something that was basically buried and you bring it to life. And you do it by yourself, with your family, with your children. You re-experience the event. You don't just study it like in a lab or in the academia. You live it day to day. Zikaron, memory, is not only history. It's to bring this past event and make it a new event, which is relevant to your life. So now, if we understand Rav Soloveitchik the way we should, we already begin to understand the essential difference between history and memory, and why Jewish tradition basically encourages us to remember and not just to learn history. Because there is a divine demand, expectation, that we will relive, rejuvenate, reignite, re-experience events from the past and make them ours. In a way, recreate the event based on your time. If that's true, take a look. How do we do that? How do we take a past event and make it real, make it relevant, make it ours? The Rambam, Maimonides, in the Laws of Shabbat, in chapter 29, chapter Kaftet, Halacha Aleph, says the following. Mitzvat aseh min Torah, there is a positive commandment from the Torah to sanctify the Shabbat day with a verbal statement, as implied by Exodus. Zechor et Yom HaShabbat lekadsho. Remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. I.e., we remember it with what? With words of praise that reflect its holiness. Klomar, this remembrance must be made at the Sabbath entrance and its departure. At the day's entrance with the Kiddush that sanctifies the day, and its departure with Havdalah. So we have what seems to be an enigmatic commandment in the Torah. Zachor et Yom HaShabbat. You shall remember the Sabbath day to sanctify it. What does it mean to remember the Shabbat? Should I just sit here and think about the Shabbat, remember the Shabbat? What does it mean? Says the Rambam, who was a codifier of law. He wanted to understand, how can I codify this commandment to an action? Says the Rambam, you shall recite during Kiddush on Friday night the idea of Shabbat. It's the day, Zecher Lemaaseh Bereshit. It's a remembrance to the creation of the universe, and it's also Zecher Lietziat Mitzrayim. It's also a remembrance to what? To Exodus. So how do you fulfill the mitzvah, the commandment of Zachor? By verbalizing it, by saying it, by reciting it, by bringing it to life. You take an event that was given to us, a commandment that was given to us on Har Sinai thousands of years ago, that basically reflect what was done thousands of years before that, the creation of the world, Exodus later on. And you in 2023, on a Friday night, you take the cup, you make Kiddush, and you bring it back to life. You are part now of creation. You are now part of Exodus. And when Shabbat departs, you do the same thing on Havdalah. So the way to revive a past event, to create a memory, is by formalizing it, by verbalizing it in a sentence or a statement that you say on a cup of wine. When it comes to Pesach, there is a demand, a requirement, lizkor, to remember. The Torah states in Deuteronomy, chapter 16, verse Gimel, Lo tochal alav chametz, you shall not eat anything leavened with it, Shivat yamim tochal alav matzot lechem oni. For 7 days thereafter you shall eat unleavened bread, bread of distress. Why? Ki bechipazon yatzata mimitzrayim. You left Egypt with haste. For what? So that you may remember the day of your departure from the land of Egypt as long as you live. Why do we eat matzah? So we shall remember that it was lechem oni. It was a bread of distress. And God saved us from this distress. So here, no verbalization. There are no words. There is just very simple action. Eat the matzah. When you taste the matzah, whatever taste there is to the matzah, you feel that you are now back in time, like your ancestors who were enslaved and ate this distressed bread. And now you sit in Tafshin Pei Gimel, the Jewish year of 2023, and you live in Eretz Israel, in Medinat Israel, or wherever we are, and we sit, and Baruch Hashem, we are free, and God saved us then, and He is saving us now. We're connecting ourselves to a past event, rejuvenate it, revive it, and now we are part of it. So Shabbat is the Kiddush and every other Yom Tov. So with verbalization, you bring the memory back. And on Pesach, on the Seder night, we eat matzah. And by the way, the halachic commandment to eat matzah is only on the first night. All the other days, we shouldn't have chametz. But there is no mitzvah to eat matzah, only according to one opinion of the Vilna Gaon. But the idea is that dafka, specifically on the night of the Seder, we eat matzah because we are now part of Exodus. We were part of slavery, and now we are part of this nation who was redeemed. Says Rashi, the French commentator in the 11th century, Lema'an tizkor, that you shall remember, al yedei achilat hapesach ve'hamatzah. How shall you remember? Which means it's a very abstract commandment. You shall remember. What does that mean? In today's world, I will maybe make a notice on my phone so it will remind me today's Pesach. That's not the way to do it. Says Rashi, you need to eat. You need to eat the Pesach, the Paschal lamb. You need to eat the maror. You need to eat the matzah. And then you will remember the day of your redemption. You need to do something. It's not only enough. It's not sufficient just to remember it with your mind or just to read about it. You need to do it. You need to speak about it. You need to perform an action that connects you to the past. Rabbi Ovadia Sforno, one of the most famous commentators in Italy in the 16th century, says the following. למען תזכור את יום צאתך מארץ מצרים כל ימי חייך. So that you shall remember the day that you left Egypt all your lives. So says the Sforno, something fascinating. Hatam, the reason that I have commanded you to internalize this manifestation of God's direct guidance of your fate, is so that the compensation of the shorter lunar year with the seasonal orbits of the solar year be affected through the addition of extra days or an extra month, so that these months will always occur partially after the spring. Which means, maybe I'll read it in Hebrew and I will translate. I think it will be easier. The Sforno talks about a very interesting halachic process. We know that Pesach always falls b'chodesh Aviv, on the month of the springtime. Now, we know that we, Jews, count for the moon, and everyone else count to the sun. So, basically, there is a difference of 11 days between the Jewish year and the secular year. After a while, obviously, you understand that we need to catch up. So there is a leap year. And the interesting part is that we, as a Sanhedrin, as the High Jewish Court, we need to make sure that Pesach always falls in the spring, which means if we need to make the year leap year, so Pesach will be in the spring, that's what we're going to do. So why is that so important? Who will care so much if Pesach will not be exactly at springtime? It will be, 3 weeks before springtime. What, we cannot celebrate Leil Seder if it's not going to be 75 degrees, I'm talking Fahrenheit, outside? If it will be only 52 degrees, we cannot celebrate Seder? Says Sforno, the entire idea of making the year leap year, so Pesach will fall on the springtime, is kedei shetizkor yetziat Mitzrayim, so you shall remember Exodus, kol yemei chayecha. Meaning your entire life will be that every time Pesach is about to come already a month before, I need to make sure that it falls exactly at the same time and the same season it was when we left Mitzrayim. This is incredible. The entire year is revolved around one idea, Pesach. Pesach was a momentous occasion. That was what we call Rega Mechonen in Hebrew, which means that was a moment that basically established who we are. So the entire year revolved around Chag Aviv, the holiday that falls in the springtime, which means Pesach. So it's not only a personal memory that you recite on Kiddush like the Rambam. It's not only a personal connection through performing a mitzvah of eating, matzah, maror, Pesach. It's the entire communal, national, collective memory. It's all about what? How you bring Pesach to life, also with its seasonal timing, which is Aviv, springtime. So that's what Rav Ovadia Sforno says. If we go to source number 10, the Torah says in Deuteronomy chapter 32, Zechor Yemot Olam. We brought this source, but I'm now going to explore this verse. Zechor Yemot Olam, remember the days of old. Binu Shno Dor Vador. Gain insight, explore, investigate the years of ages past. Sh'al avicha veyagetcha, ask your parent who will inform you. Zkenecha v'yomru lach, your elders who will tell you. So what does that mean? Says Rashi, again, Zechor Yemot Olam, remember the days of old, what he, meaning Hashem, did to previous generations who provoked him to anger. So Rashi says, there is also another component in Zechira. It's not only to reconnect to it, it's not only to make it relevant, it's not only to revive it, it's not only to re-experience it, it's not only to reignite you and connect you to it, but it's also investigating it. You should investigate, explore, what were the reasons that made Hashem upset with generations before you, so you know not to repeat it. And this sounds a bit like what? History. And if we continue, the Rashi continues. He says, Binu Shno Dor Vador. What does it mean? Gain insight or consider the years of old. Dor Enosh she'etzif alehem et mei okeanos. For example, the generation of Enosh, over whom he, meaning Hashem, caused the waters of the ocean to flow, which means the flood. Dor HaMabul, davar acher, another explanation, is if you have not set your attention to the past, consider at least the years of generation and generation, so that you become conscious of what might happen in the future. That he has the power to bestow upon you good and make you inherit the land and the days of Mashiach and Olam Haba and the world to come. Which means there is a commandment to every Jew to gain insight from past events. Hashem in a way tells us the secret of good life, the secret of reward, the secret of meaningful life lies in the past. Go to the past, ask the people, ask the elders, connect yourself to the past, and live your life in a better way based on the mistakes that they did in the past that you should not repeat, and then re-engaged with those events and make them yours. The Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra from the 11th century, says the following: Ba'avur she'amar zchor, the scriptures obviously states that it's because earlier said remember, it says sha'al avicha v'yagedcha, and then if you don't remember, or you cannot gain insight from past events, you know what you need to do? You shall ask your father, your parents, the generations before you. If you forgot what your fathers told you, ask them. Ignorance is not a blessing. You need to ask. You need to show curiosity. You need to try to seek for answers in the past. And your elders, they have an insight. You shall consult with them. As a side note, I will just tell you, one of the ideas, beautiful ideas of Leil Seder, is the questions and answers. Even the questions from the evil, the wicked son. You should listen to him. You should encourage people to ask. The Tam, who doesn't know how to ask, she'eino yodea lishol, you should encourage him. You should entice them to ask, because when there is a question, there is a connection. People who show full apathy, they don't care, they don't ask, they're careless. We encourage questions. It might be questions that make us uncomfortable. It might be questions that it creates attention. But if someone asks, it means he or she cares. And that's what we want around our Pesach Seder. Then, in Aderet Eliyahu, the Vilna Gaon, he said something fascinating. He says, Zchor yemot olam, binu shnot dor vador, sh'al avicha. It basically says 3 different elements or components to the idea of remembrance, of memory. There is zchor, remember. There is binu, gain insight, look inside, look, להתבונן, to look with tremendous attention. And then sh'al, ask. Says the Vilna Gaon, הזכיר ג' לשונות. He mentioned 3 languages or 3 phrases. Zchor, remember, binu, gain insight, and sh'al, and ask. על דבר שאמר ולא נתן השם לכם לב לדעת ועיניים לראות ואוזניים לשמוע. It corresponds with what Hashem said to the people, to the Jewish people when he was upset with them. He said to the people, Hashem did not give you lev ladat, heart to know, עיניים לראות, eyes to see, and ears to hear, to listen. כי ג' דברים אלו מביאים לידי אמונה, because those 3 things, לב לדעת, heart to know, עיניים, eyes to see, and ears to listen, מביאים לידי אמונה. They bring a person to faith. How? על ידי ראייה, או על ידי שמיעה, או על ידי בינת ליבו מעצמו. By seeing, by listening, or by gaining insight with my own exploration and my own investigation. ולכן אמר ביחזקאל, בצורת הבית, and therefore, when Hashem showed Ezekiel how to build the future Beit Mikdash, the future temple, it says to him, ראה בעיניך, look with your eyes, באוזניך שמע, listen with your ears, ושים לבך, and pay attention, give your heart in attention. עין, eye, ear, אוזן, and לב, and heart. והוא נגד ג' חלקי התורה, שבכתב, שבעל פה, וסודות התורה. He says the eye, the ear, and the heart correspond to what? To Torah שבכתב, the written Torah, Torah שבעל פה, the oral Torah, and then סודות התורה, which means, let's call it the mysticism, the the internal meaning of the Torah. לתורה שבכתב צריך עיניים לראות. For the written Torah, you need eyes to see. And then, לשבעל פה צריך אוזניים לשמוע. For the oral Torah, it's orally. Basically, before it was written, people had to hear. They had to listen to the traditions that were passed from one generation to another. ולסודות התורה, and for the mysticism, to the inner meaning of Torah, what do you need? Binat halev, the wisdom of the heart. Is not only to read it, it's not only to listen to it. You need to fully engage your heart in it. כמו שביארנו. ונגד ראיה, so what do we have now? Let's pause here for a second. We have eye to see, ear to listen, heart to understand. Each one of them correspond to what? To Torah שבכתב, the written Torah for the eye, oral Torah for the ear, and the mysticism on the inner meaning of Torah is to the heart. How is that connected to lizkor, to remember, binu, to understand, and lish'ol, to ask? Says the Gra this beautiful idea. He says, neged re'aya correspond to the idea of seeing, אמר זכור ימות עולם, אשר ראו עיניך האותות והמופתים אשר עשה לעיניך. He says, correspond to the idea of seeing is what is to remember. How do you remember things? Because you have picture in your mind. There are things that you saw, so you remember. Binu shno dor vador, gain insight to the events that happen in past generations. Bevinat libcha. Binu shno dor vador, bebinat halev. So that's the insight of your heart. שאל אביך, הם המקובלות ומפורסמות ומוחשות והם בשמיעה. And to ask your father, ask your parents, ask the generations before you, it's the listening ear. So zchor is for seeing. Binu, gain insight, it's for binat halev, it's the wisdom of the heart, it's the mysticism. And shmi'ah, to listen, is for asking your parents. So then he says the following. He says, וכן אמר למעלה, הישמר לך ושמור נפשך מאוד, פן תשכח את הדברים אשר ראו עיניך, ופן יסורו מלבבך כל ימי חייך, והודעתם לבניך ולבני בניך. The Torah says, you should be very careful and safeguard your soul. If you will forget all the words that you saw, or if you will remove them from your heart, so you shall be able to say it to your children and your children's children. Again, the same things. Don't forget what you saw, don't remove it from your heart, and don't forget to transmit it orally to your children. And then he says, so what do we have here? We have moach, liba, and puma, which means cognitive abilities, lev, your heart, and mouth. Moach, brain, liba, heart, lev, and puma, your mouth. Ken schira b'moach, you remember with your moach, with your brain, and then you see it being transmitted into your eye, because sometimes we remember things and then we imagine them with our eyes, and then we need to share it with others. Then this becomes our obligation to transmit it to future generations. So basically what the Gra says, which is so meaningful, he says, true memory is to remember those things that you saw. They are in your mind. They are what we call, they are in potential. They are hidden. Then you need to imagine them with your eyes, with your imaginary abilities. Bring them out from your brain, bring them out, and then what you need to say? You need to verbalize them. You need to share it with the others. What do we do on the Seder night? We don't learn history. We create memories. We share with everyone who attends this beautiful Seder night what we remember, how we see it. We engage them with our own pictures. We engage everyone else with the experiences that we had, and we verbalize it. We express it. We share it. In a way, we even make ourselves vulnerable by sharing our personal events and let others learn from it and add to it. We complete the story by having eyes, ears, ayin, ozen, and the insight of our hearts, binat halev. So memory, a Jewish memory, is so strong, so meaningful, and it's basically the basic fundamental of our Seder night, is to remember, but in its all-encompassing components. It's not only just to remember, just talk about it. It's to imagine it. It's to bring it to life. It's to engage with it. It's to engage others with our story. It's to be a storyteller which not only share his own personal experiences and make himself or herself vulnerable. It's to engage others with my story, which become now their story. And they add their story. And then we create these links and another link and another link in this beautiful chain that connects us to the past. The Ibn Ezra again says, Sha'al avicha, you shall ask your parents. The entire idea of Leil HaSeder is what? Ki ishalcha bincha machar le'emor. That your children will ask you questions. The entire idea of Manishtana that we all sing together is about what? It's about the idea of asking questions, being engaged in a conversation. The Seder night is not a recitation of few chapters from Sefer Shmot about the Jewish people went down to Mitzrayim, they were enslaved, God created miracles, and then He took them out. Not at all. I want to read to you another source that it's not on your source sheets, from Rav Soloveitchik. Rav Soloveitchik says in Zman Cherutenu, in his essay about the time of our redemption, he says the following: הצורה שההלכה מעניקה לסיפורי יציאת מצרים היא חקירה ומסירת מידע, שאלה תשובה, פליאה ותמיהה, והסבר. The nature of the Haggadah is not just a recitation of few chapters in Sefer Shmot. Not at all. If you pay attention to the Haggadah mostly are parts of what? Of Deuteronomy, of Bikurim, when we bring the first fruits and we recite our quote-unquote history, and also from different midrashim that were composed in Eretz Israel. Midrashei Halacha in the 2nd century, Midrashei Haggadah later on from the Talmud, which is fascinating because we already have a text. Why not just to take Sefer Shmot and to read from the beginning of Shmot until the end of Beshalach? You know what? You want to talk about the 10 commandments? Read some parts of Yitro. But that's it. Why do we need to create a new text? Says Rav Soloveitchik. אילו רצו חז"ל לספר רק את סיפור המעשה, if our sages just wanted to tell us about Exodus, they will do exactly the same thing I told you before, which means just let's read together Sefer Shmot. But that's not the goal, the purpose of the Seder night. But rather, בליל הסדר, on the Seder night, הופך כל בית יהודי לקהילה מלמדת, להחווה דידקטית. Every Seder night, our table, our dining room becomes a classroom. And there is no one teacher. Might be a guiding teacher, a main teacher. But everyone is teaching others. You can teach by asking questions. You can teach by sharing experiences. You can teach by sharing your angle, your perspective on events in the past and current events. You engage in a conversation. Basically, the Seder night is Laila shel Chinuch. It's a night of learning. It's a night of education. It's a night of teaching, of sharing, of questioning, of exploring this curiosity that we all have within us and bringing out. So, if now we ask, what's the difference between history and memory? There are certain things that are basically parallel. For example, there is this component of investigating the past, which, by the way, it's a commandment. We must look into the past in order to know not to repeat the same mistakes that were happening in the past, in order to create a better present and a better future. But our obligation, our duty, our responsibility does not end there. At the Seder night, we have a tremendous privilege to reignite the flame of dedication, of commitment, of relevancy to our lives, to past events, but not only to our lives. The mitzvah of the Seder is not to show how smart someone is, but rather to engage the entire table, all attendees, everyone, the one who has a lot of background, the one who has no background, the one who is basically just forced to be there, to engage everyone in a conversation, to revive those past events so they are real. The Rambam says that a person should feel that Hayom hu yotze mimitzrayim, that today Exodus occurred. He is one of the people of Israel who are leaving Egypt after years and years of slavery. And he's on his way to receive the Torah. He's on his way to the land of Israel. He's on his way to write his own chapter in this beautiful book, the book of our people. The idea of the Agadah is not to teach history, is to create memories, is to bring those memories from the past, to make them ours, and then to create memories for the future generations. Chag Sameach.